Hello, everyone. This is Jonathan Little, and I'm here with the first installment of my new weekly podcast here at weeklypokerhand.com, where I go over a poker hand that either I or someone else plays, and I analyze the play and tell you why I do what I do, or critique the other player's play and let you know if it's good one way or the other. In this hand, this is a multi-table tournament. We're fairly deep in the tournaments. It's 250, 500 blinds with 540 chips in the middle as an ante. And I pick up ace-queen in early to middle position and elect to min-raise. The first thing that you should note is that I am min-raising and not making it 1500. A pretty big leak in a lot of amateur players' games is they just raise to three big blinds pre-flop with their entire hand range. And the reason I think this is a leak is because at this stage of the tournament, you're either going to get shoved on or people are going to fold a lot of the time. Notice that anyone that has around 10,000 chips or less is going to be shoving or folding, and that's about half the players behind me. So whenever you do have a garbage hand in min raise, and you raise to three big blinds, whenever you get shoved on, you're losing that extra one big blind. So say they shove on you a third of the time, and I fold half the time. That means every time I raise, I'm losing an extra 1/6 of a big blind on average. And if you do that 1,000 times over the course of the year, you lose 600 big blinds, which is a pretty big deal. So that's what you want to avoid. So right here I raise it up to 1,000 and we get called on the button. You will find that when you do min raise, you will get called a little bit more often, especially from deeper stack players, but really that's not that big of a deal because it's not like I'm drawing dead post flop. I mean, I probably have the best hand a lot of the time. One other benefit of min raising is that your opponents will call you with worse hands, so that keeps their hand range wide, which is usually a good thing. So right here we get a very good flop, queen 6-4, and I like to continuation bet. I think we should be continuation betting here with our entire range, and if you're going to be betting here with when you have like 10-9 suited, you should certainly be betting when you have ace-queen. And this is all about trying to stay balanced. You want to make sure that whatever you do with your monsters, you're also doing with your weak hands. If you're only betting here when you have top pair or better, or a pair or better, a lot of opponents will quickly figure that out, and every time you check, they'll just take the pot away from you. And by the same note, if you check every time you have top pair, they just will never put any money in after you check. So right here I think betting is really the only play because you do want to bet with your whole range, and you do want to pick up the pot. Also notice that I am betting relatively small here. And I think you do need to be betting about 2/5 pot or so with your entire range. And we get called. The turn's the 3 of spades, and I like to check. And this is kind of a turning point in the hand where a lot of players will just go ahead and bet and then try to shove the river. But I think right here when my opponent calls the flop, if he has a queen, we're going to get all the money in anyways. And because we're going to get all the money in anyways, there's no reason to bet to try to get him to get it all in with a queen, because if I check, he's just going to bet his queen for value because he thinks it's good. So there's no reason to bet to try to get value out of a queen. So we have to think, what else can our opponent have, and how do I get value out of that? And in this spot, I think my opponent's going to show up with some of the random gut shots, some percentage of the time, like 7-8, maybe 7-6, maybe 5-4. Maybe 6-5, hands like that. Obviously, if our opponent has this beat here, we're not looking to fold the hand. That should be well known right from the beginning that we're not looking to fold. So if he does have his beat, we're just going to get stacked. And notice that if he does have his beat, he's never folding anyways. So by betting, we're not going to bluff those hands out of the pot or anything like that. So again, that's another reason why betting doesn't serve much of a purpose in this exact situation. So I like to check. And the reason we're checking is, again, just to try to get value out of all of his bluffs. Or to make him think that his queen is certainly good. So I check and he bets 3,500. And this is a spot where a lot of players will just shove all in at this point. They think, haha, I trapped him for 3,500 chips. Now I'm going to shove and pick up this pot. But that's not what you want to do. Right here, what you want to do is you want to win the entire pot. You want to win his entire stack. You're looking to get the entire 15,000 chips in the middle. And the only way to actually do that and have a good chance of getting called by garbage is to call and then let him bluff the river. And you will realize that, say your opponent does have 6-5 here, he is going to outdraw you some percentage of the time. And of course that's bad, but it's certainly worth giving him the pot 1/6 of the time in exchange for getting the whole stack in whenever he does decide to spaz off, which a lot of players will decide to bluff here. Or he may even have a hand that he thinks he's value betting. So I like to call. Also notice that there's no real reason to raise as well, because if I raise, he's probably only going to continue with a queen or better. So we bluff him off of all of his draws, which is bad. Anytime you bluff your opponent off of hands that have very little equity, that's a bad thing, because they're drawing very thin. Anyway, so I call. Also notice that the pot is relatively large, so if I check the river, my opponent's only bet's really going to be to shove, and that's a good thing. You don't want him to have, or you don't want us to have like 3 or 4 times the pot behind, because then we're not going to be able to get all the money in. On the river, we get a king, which may look like a scare card, and it certainly is a scary card, but it's not like a happy situation for us at this point. But you got to think, is it really possible for our opponent to have a king? And if I do think his range is made up of either queens or draws, none of the draws contain a king, besides maybe something like king 6 of spades, but he'd have to call us with king 6 of spades pre-flop, which is pretty unlikely. I guess he could have something like king jack of spades and decided to float the flop and then bet the turn. So we do lose to that. We also lose to king queen. King queen is the main hand that I'm concerned with at this point. But that being said, if I'm only concerned with king jack of spades and king queen, that's a pretty small range of hands, especially considering I have a queen in my hand. And also notice I have the queen of spades, so that discounts some of those random spade draws that he could have, like king queen of spades, because I have the queen. So his value range is very small here, and because of that, I think we have a very clear call. Even though it's kind of tough to put him on a stone bluff at this point, I do think that he will show up with random spade draws here that he decided to float the flop with. Floating the flop is when you call the flop with the intention of bluffing later. He could also have something like 6-5, 5-4, a hand like that. And he could even have something like ace-2 or ace-5 and decide to spaz off of those. So all in all here, I think this is a pretty easy call. And the main reason this is an easy call, again, is because my opponent's value range is very small. Only very few hands. And my opponent's bluff range is relatively wide compared to the value range. In this spot, say I think he only has maybe 10 combinations of value hands, for example. I don't know the exact number. And I think he has 30 combinations of bluffs. That's a pretty good spot for me. I think that's probably about what we're looking at here. You will find other situations, though, where your opponent's value range is maybe 100 hands, but their bluffing range is like 300 hands, so it's the same thing. However, you also find spots where your opponent's value range is like 10 hands and their bluff range is like 5 hands. And in that spot, you should be more tempted to fold. So anyways, right here, there are a lot of combinations of bluffs, very few combinations of made hands, so I think we have a pretty easy call. I do find a call here, and my opponent shows up with ace-7 of spades, so he does have one of those hands that I thought he had, where he floated the flop with a spade draw, and then bet the turn and continued on the river. So if you guys have any questions or comments about this hand, or if you want me to review a hand for you, feel free to send it in to support@jonathanlittlesecrets.com, and I will check it out. And also, check out weeklypokerhand.com for the next part of this video where I analyze my opponent's play and let you know if I think his play was actually bad. Because I'm sure it certainly looks bad that he's decides to bluff his stack off with ace-7. But, as you'll see, I'm not too sure it was actually that terrible of a play. So check back to weeklypokerhand.com for that. And also, if you're only listening to the audio of this, you can check back to weeklypokerhand.com for a video so you can follow along as well. This has been Jonathan Little. Thank you very much for watching.